Hi there, everyone, and this is episode that come out of thin air. I was helping out this fellow Commodore enthusiast on a Facebook forum the other day. He was asking some questions about what could be wrong with some tape interface on a C64, and he had some special issues. And as I was thinking about this, what do I really know about the cassette interface in the C64? Back in the day, we actually did a lot of repairs on this. Because there was this special case in Norway and the Nordic countries and England, there was a huge amount of people that never owned a disk drive. They was relying on the plain or C2N cassette recorder. And back in the day when the kids was swarming around in basements and living rooms with the thick woolly carpets and their ball and pokoloco and other thick sweater made out of cotton, they was creating huge amount of static electricity. So back in the day when I was repairing and having service on C64s, we actually swapped out a lot of CPUs. And this was something that was unique for Europe. In USA, they almost never had this fault. So that had me wondering what actually the tape interface contains. Why is this done in this way, and why is this even an issue? And as the 6510 and 85,000 CPUs are becoming rarer and rarer, do we have to do something to protect our beloved computers? And even though the cassette is not the main input device on machines today, we tend to have a lot of old tapes, and we do have one or more C2Ns that are adjusted to this particular turbo tape loader and so on. I at least have maybe 20 different C2Ns, and I do know that I only have I have tested maybe one or two of those that still work. Maybe the other do, I have not tested them, but I do use them from time to time, and it was kind of interesting to see what actually went wrong here. And by the way, the reason that he had problems was not immediately because of a C2N. It was because of this adapter down here. It is an adapter for an Ultimate 2 Plus cartridge that allows you to interface with a C2N and do tap files, either by loading them or writing tap files to ordinary tape if you have them. So this is what this video is about. So it's a bit nerdy and detailed stuff about the C2N and the C64 tape interface. And as you might know, the tape interface was not invented by the VIC-20 or the C64. It actually has been with us since the PET days. And how does this look inside the mighty C64? As I've told you before numerous times, I did have a professional relationship with Commodore back in the days and did repairs on their computers. And back in the day when I did this, it was mostly older bread bins, and a majority of them had the 407 or older mainboards. And this is what is in the board that is 250425 or newer. I have not taken and looked into every variation of the schematics, but I have picked at least 3 different variations here. And I have marked out the special leads that we take into consideration here with colors. And you can see here that the 6510 CPU actually has 3 direct connections with the tape interface. And you have the motor, and that is on-off input, where we turn on or off the motor, and this is from the unregulated 9 volt. and this is regulated down to about 6 volt when it hits the motor. We have the 6.8 volt here over the sine diode, and you have about 0.7 or something drop over this NPN transistor, so you have about 6.1, 6.2 volt something. And you have the sense cassette, and this is the, as I understand it, the input that does sense if there is a cassette coupled to the system. And it gives out a 0 if a key is pressed and 1 if no key is pressed. And you have CAS write, that is actually the output when you save stuff to your C64. And you have the cassette read, that actually is in action when you read or load a tape. And this is all digital signals, and that means that everything that makes the analog magic of a tape go digital is happening into the C2N device, and what's going in here is digital input. And when you load a tape, it goes straight on to the 6526, where it goes into the serial shift register, where the bytes are shifted in. And I'm not really sure how accurate the baud rate and stuff on the C2N are, because that depends on the tape motor speed. And when we adjusted these boxes back in the day, it all came down to the read head. We never bothered to see on the motor speed. So I do think that that is somewhat interchangeable, and that it doesn't matter that much. But of course, when you read digital bytes out of bits out of a cassette tape, they have to be synchronized so that you know when to read this. So if there is a lot of speed difference, then you will get problems, especially when you have turbo tapes. On the stock 300 baud rate, I don't think you have that much problem. But the write signal goes straight out of the CPU. And that means that the CPU is actually handling the shifting of this to 1 bit of this register. So that means that we are programming the 6510 to have a shift register out on P4. And while that is not difficult to do in programming, we do have to make sure that the bit rate is accurate. And as this is not interrupt driven, they do tend to do this. They turn off screen refresh and other stuff to make sure that nothing is coming in the way of writing out to this. And the problem that occurred on my fellow Commodore enthusiast's computer was that the screen went black when he tried to connect this interface, and also when he tried to read from the C2N and the C2N was connected, everything went fine. And also the interface for the Ultimate cartridge worked just fine on his other computer. So that had me thinking this could be a marginal 6510 CPU with some difficulties, but what else could be wrong? And that was when I started to look into this and discovered that there actually has been a lot of changes on the cassette interface or the tape interface on the C64 over the years. And what we have here is what we had back in the day. The cassette read just went to the 6526 with no noise suppression whatsoever. And the cassette write went out here through a ferrite bead to take off high frequency noise. And the CAS sense has a pull-up resistor, but nothing else. And cassette motor interface also has a ferrite bead, and there is a ferrite bead on the 5 volt supply as well. But that's about it. Everything else went straight into the 6510. So it's no wonder that this was breaking a lot. Because what we did back in the day, we often collected a group of maybe 5 kids in front of a TV, and everyone had their own turbo tape, and to make that turbo tape readable on all other devices, we often took with us our own C2N and we just swapped them so that we know that our tape was able to be read on the particular C64. And we was of course switching these around, and we didn't always bother to turn things on or off when we did this. And even though if you turn it off, you still have a massive way to generate shocks on this. And you also might remember that the C2N cassette player had this huge ground wire where we have nowhere to connect it on the European C64. There was no ground point to connect it to, so static electricity was a thing, but Commodore in Europe did not do anything to protect it, at least from what it looks here. And this is from the newest C64, and this is the different short boards. And we have a schematic here that tells us that they again has done away with some of the protection, and in special it is the resistor 100 ohm on the cas right that is taken away from the circuit. And that means that you do have some high frequency noise suppression on this capacitor, but you have no way of doing low frequency stuff and protecting the input on the CPU here. So that is a change. They have kept the 2 transistor drive of the motor, and the cas sense is also like the original with a 3.3K pull-up. And you can also see here that they have put some capacitors here to protect the output. But when you look into the picture here of the C2N, you can see that C1 is actually not populated at all. So it's not in use. And you can also see here that you have this C3. And this might be a capacitor, but I have never seen anything like it. If something, it looks like a drossel or something. Or maybe a resistor, but it probably is not. It might be a capacitor, I don't know, but it's not the same kind that is used everywhere else. And you also have a lot of other capacitors that is not populated here, C28, C29, 42, 27, and 32, and so on. And this C84, I am not able to find it anywhere on the board. So even though they have simplified this, they have simplified it even more than it really looks here, because some of the measurements to suppress noise they have not even bothered to fit. And we have down here a comparison about how this looks, and I've never really given any thought to this. I've seen that the transistor here for driving the tape motor is placed differently, but I have not looked further into it, so I wasn't aware of all the changes that has been done on this interface over the years. And of course that had me looking to see what other has done on this, and there has been some notice about changing things here, but I couldn't find much. So whether these changes has done anything good or bad, I don't know, but it seems to me that the CPU still is somewhat under-protected with this interface. And also the 6526 that is also being rarer by the minute does have the read connected straight to the output line with no interfacing in between whatsoever. And this is a block diagram of how this should work from Sam's computer repair guide something, and this is actually a drawing of the original layout of this. As you can see, they have the 3 transistors in here, so it's the same that you have in the original older schematics. And otherwise it doesn't tell us much. It does tell us that the 6526 CA also happens to do the floppy drive serial request input on the same line as you have the tape interface. So tape and floppy simultaneously, I don't think that will work very well. And I also been looking into the C2Ns, because the C2Ns have to deliver a good digital signal to the C64. And this is the newest schematic I could find for the C2N. It's also the same that I have in my original service binder, and it is actually from 1984, I think, and it's stated preliminary something. So I did wonder if there was a later version, but I have not been able to find it. And while this is not a very easy schematic to follow because it uses all these discrete components, and this is something that is quite unique, I think, because if this is the latest schematics, Commodore actually did cost reducing the C2N by getting rid of a lot of TTL chips. I do think it was 74 LS14s that was used here with the Smith trigger input to do the forming of the waves to have logical output on this. But in this later version, it's all transistor based, and of course that probably was cheaper, because back in the day you had through-hole components anyway, and the price of the transistors was coming way down, and some of the TTL chips was not, and the op amps, of course. So they probably did the calculator thing and did this. And this is a slightly older, and this is also something that I never really did any fault finding on the C2N. We did the adjustment of the heads, and we did replace some motors and some stuff and some drive, but nothing else, because they was dirt cheap. And this is the most common version, I think. It uses the LS14, two of these in series here to invert the signal, and you have invert the signal twice to get so that it does not get inverted. And you do have op amp here that is connected to 5 volts, so this is driven between 0 and 5 volts, and you can actually see that they have drawn some of the pulses, how this should look. And this is quite interesting, and you do have a differential amplifier here that actually connect to the head, probably to drive this head a bit wider. And when it comes to the read signal, you can see here that I have drawn this small signal. The first step, it's inverted and a bit higher. The next step, it is inverted again and more amplified. And the final stage here on the, what you can call the amplifier circuit is to make the final sine wave here. And then you can actually see that they've started to oversteer the signal so that it becomes a square. And this signal is actually fed into the 74 LS14. And this is the 14 is a hex inverter, so it's also here inverted twice to get it to the same level as it was here, same phase that it was here. So in this newer schematics, they have used a transistor for this on the output, and they also reduced with one op amp down here. So this has a slightly reduced count of components, and it's a bit more difficult to explain, and they have not written the curves on this either, but I do presume that it's as good as the other one. And this is it's about the same as what we saw previous, but as you can see, they have put everything upside down. Maybe it's the Australian version that's meant to be used on the other side of the globe. I don't know, but this is actually a better representation, because here you see the hysteresis of the Schmidt trigger on these IC as it's used. And they also use 4 of these here instead of an op amp as the first circuit. And also on this they have used the same 4 op amps, but they don't have 2 Schmidt triggers here to invert the signals again. They use an NPN transistor with output of the collector to have the right phase. So this is again a slightly different version, and this is a circuit that probably is both easier to understand and easier to build, because the margins of the components has less, they means less for the circuit than if you do everything analog with discrete components. And this is a much older. This is from PET Service Guide, but it has the same base circuit, and this is almost exactly the same as in the secondary circuit that I was looking into, but they do have the diagnostic contact here. And this is kind of a strange thing, because inside a C2N cassette player you do have a connector that looks almost exactly the same as the one that is in the C64, but this is a diagnostic contact with read data, 5 volt write data, head return, head hot side, and ground. So this is something that you plugged into your special device to have this tuned to, but I never learned to use this, and I did not have any equipment or something that connected to this. So I'm not sure how this was meant to be used. But everything else here is about the same. And I do also have an older one from a service guide from a PET. And this is again something that looks much like the newer version. And it also have the test connector written in here. Maybe it's something on the print or something. But as you can see, there are some differences among all of these, but they've not changed that much over the years, and the functionality and making of all the signals digital and stuff is the same all over. And as I was digging into this, I saw that there is some inventions that has been done. You do have the Ultimate 2 Plus cartridge, but did you know that there is a way to use a RS-232 to drive the cassette interface? I certainly did not. But these guys was giving me some pointers of how this interface actually works. They did not have a very thorough description. You can see the Simmers.net contains a backup of their project work. And this works on all Commodore equipment that has the same cassette interface. And what I learned from looking at these guys here is that yes, the signals was working as I thought they was in regarding to the write, sense, and read. And also the description that I got from my fellow Commodore enthusiast that this went wrong every time he tried to connect this, and even though he didn't try to write. And he also checked afterwards that the write actually did not work, so when he tried to save anything, it just went to a blue screen. And I was looking into that, but I couldn't understand what the write signal should have to do, because he was measuring some strange thing on his write input. And this actually is the only mention I've ever seen that Commodore is putting the write signal low every time there is done a read from the cassette. And the same when it's doing a write to the cassette. Of course, the write signal is going up and down, but it starts with putting this high and getting low before it starts to read data. And it puts the signal high again when it's finished reading data. So the write signal also acts as a strobe or a sync, or what you will call it when you are reading something into the interface. I can find no traces that this is ever used on a C2N, because it would be possible to use this to do handshake to increase the speed of the interface. But the turbo tape seems to do that just fine, so there is really no problem with this. And they also told me something that I did not know. They discovered that the Plus 4 and C16 line of computers have edge-triggered transfer as opposed to level-triggered as the rest of the line. And that means that the signal is read on the flank of the signal, not when it's resting on high or low. And that also made some challenges for their software, but they did manage to get a universal software that they can use all over the line. And then you just did the tape files on your computer and sent them to the tape interface. and use the normal tape interface on the C64. This is quite a bit of software, and I think if this is working as they say it does, it was a really impressive piece of work. And what did I say about making a buffer that could actually help save our C64? And this is a suggested buffer for the write output. I'm using a 74LS14 or a HGT14 or something, and I'm just inverting the signal twice. I can also use 7407, I think, open collector, non-inverting buffer, but I don't think there is any difference between using this because the signal is quite slow anyway, and this is the way it's handled on the input on the C2N anyway. So this is quite the easy connection, and this is for the version that do have the 100 ohm resistor in line with the signal and the capacitor. Then you just hook it up like so, and you can of course use the other lines here to do the CAS read and the sense too. The CAS motor has a good buffer already with a 1K resistor before it goes into Q4. And for the slightly older versions that does not have the 100 ohm resistor but only the ferrite bead, we can actually do the CAS write like so, where we connect a 100 ohm resistor and the 470 picofarad capacitor out here. And this is something that you really can do on the socket of the 6510 CPU. So I will try to make a socket and connect in these devices here to check if this is functioning as I think they do. And for those who don't know, a ferrite bead is just something like this, and it's meant to suppress noise that comes into a computer, but it's really not the best way alone to stop high voltage or high static charges to enter a device, because if there is just one pulse with static charge, that is okay. But if you have more columns in your signal, then this can suppress. It's better to have a resistor in series and a capacitor also, so that you couple it to ground. I won't go into detail for the theory of this. And that's it really for this episode. If you want to watch more of my content, please hit like and subscribe, and you will be notified when we post new videos. And I do hope to gain 1,000 subscribers before the summer. Even though it's summer, I won't call it that because the weather is not very summer-like yet. But I do still hope to reach 1,000 subscribers over the summer. So, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again in my next episode.